Hello, I'm James Fitzsimons and welcome to The Career Scoop, a podcast all about career progression, advice and experiences aimed at assisting those who are in career transition. Today my guest, Lorraine Wrafter, an experienced global chief people officer who throughout her career has worked in a number of large multinational organizations such as Cargill Incorporated, one of the largest privately owned companies in the world, and LafargeHolcim, a Swiss building materials company. Currently, Lorraine is advising a number of international companies with a broad range of HR areas such as organization transformation, culture, team effectiveness, and business planning and coaching. Lorraine, you're very welcome to the Career Scoop.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm just so impressed with, you've lived and worked in Belgium, Ireland, Switzerland, and the UK and the US.
Yeah.
Your work has taken you to over 60 countries, which is just fabulous to hear someone coming out of Ireland who has achieved and accomplished that type of experience. If you might just share with us, just for the listeners, overview of your career, maybe some of the highs and lows, what you're most proud of.
Okay. So first of all, we moved to Ennis in Clare from Dublin. So I'd gone to school in Dublin and we moved to Clare. And then I ended up going to university in Limerick doing business. I did business because I kept it general, because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And then I specialized in human resources, mostly because it was in labor law. And the work I was doing, we were doing case studies and stuff on unions and union negotiations. And so I decided to do that rather than go down finance or marketing, etc. And like lots of people in the late 80s with high unemployment, I just went to the UK to find myself a job. And I started working with Cargill. And I started working with Cargill, and the job that I was hired for was to help with graduate recruitment. So helping the person that was responsible for it. She resigned 3 weeks after I joined because she was getting married and moving to another part of the country. So I had a month to hand over. So I got a promotion pretty quickly. And I ran the graduate recruitment program for the UK for a couple of years. Then I did my general grounding in HR, which I did for another couple of years, which was everything from doing the union negotiations with the Dockers in Hull or Liverpool. That's another story I could tell you. Learned about disciplinary processes and downsizing. And then my first significant role was the startup of the financial business within Cargill in EMEA and then with Asia. Cargill at that stage had been primarily a commodity trading company and food processing company. And I was just kind of shifting those skills into the financial instruments. They already had a broking business, so I had responsibility for the broking business too. And it started with 6 traders. And then with over 18 months, we grew by 500 across Europe, and then started helping them out in Asia because we had kind of got in place a pretty good process of hiring people because of the challenges we had, like Asia. We were just outside of the city of London, but we needed to attract people from the city of London. So I did that job, and if you were to ask me one of the highlights of my career, that's one of them, because it was every day coming to work, learning new things. Everybody was in the same position. We were all learning as we went along. We all were making mistakes as we went along. We didn't have the access to Google and just Google things up. So, for example, what are we going to pay traders in these markets? So there was no kind of salary survey. So I had to go, and all these people are now going to Barings, Lehman's, Merrill Lynch, meeting with relevant people there to understand what do they pay people in these markets. And then as we expanded into Eastern Europe, into Russia, into Ukraine, etc., Poland, which were opening up, there was no such thing as a bond trader or an equity trader. So we were hiring people that we thought had the capability, quickly bring them to other parts of the world to train them and send them back. And at the same time, don't know what to pay a local Russian trader because there's no such market. So again, going to Russia, speaking to relevant banks and people to get a sense of what we pay them. So I did that role for 6 years. I left that role because we had to reduce headcount by 40% after the Russian crisis that you may remember with Yeltsin and Russia defaulting. And so the markets went into a meltdown, that particular part. So I ended up having to lead the global downsizing, because here again, here's an example of looking at things globally. The US, you call them into the room, you give them a document, legal document, go off, there you are. Singapore, they brought them all into the one room because of loss of face, because they couldn't tell them one-to-one, and they told them all as a group, and they closed the office and they went home. Europe, we started the consultation process. And so the whole thing didn't finish here in Europe for 6 months. And then it went on, and there was a new department set up, and I was employee number 2 in what was called organization effectiveness. As we build up, it was a fee for service, and I worked across 88 of the 105 business units in Cargill at the time. And over time, I moved from being a jack of all trades, because until we had the relevant specialists in, to dealing with individuals, teams, culture, and org design. I got involved in culture, organization culture, as I was doing my master's as well at Leicester at the time. And so I worked in that department for 3 years. And I was then asked if I would move back into the business with Cargill's first global food acquisition, Cerestar. I had been doing some work as a consultant, going in, looking at the culture of the two organizations. So the company we were buying at the time was Franco-Italian, and it was customer solution organization. Whereas that part of Cargill at the time was still very much a commodity mindset, operational excellence, and of course, American. So you can imagine bringing the two together, there were some interesting integration issues. And so I really got my teeth into that. And again, all of us that were involved in this, it was our first global acquisition. So again, we were all learning. During that, while I was in that role, then we had another global acquisition, Degussa Food. And then there were smaller acquisitions, country acquisitions. And so I was involved in the culture integration, as well as all the HR policies, processes, systems, etc. And then I was asked to step out of that role, because with all these acquisitions, we just bolted them on. And we realized that, operation-wise, globally, there were problems. So we needed to kind of structure it and put the processes in place so that it could work as an agile global business. And so I did a project role for just over a year, where I was both communications and change. And to give an example of what we're doing, we were trying to bolt them all together. We had, as a result of all these acquisitions, we had 6 different commercial teams that had 6 different ways of approaching the customer. And some of them were going to the same customer. So the customer feedback was, you're confusing us, and actually you're competing with yourself at times. And so we had to, look with that commercial team to, how do we have a consistent process in the market? And how do we consistently then, what are their targets? And make sure that everything we were doing was pretty consistent externally as well as internally. And then one day in the coffee room, I was speaking with one of the senior leaders, and I knew that there was a new global food platform being put together. 26 businesses with a 30 billion turnover was coming together with the strategic plans of, there was a lot of growth going to be happening, both acquisitions, greenfield, brownfield sites. And they needed to understand who was the talent across the world in the businesses, who were the high potential, high performers, who had the leadership capabilities, because we were going to be moving lots of people across the world. One of the concerns that they had, and again, you have this with lots of organizations, particularly global ones, is how they rate them. Who they identified as high performer, high potential in one part of the world is very different to another part of the world. So we had to get a consistency in how we calibrated. So this role was a first for Cargill as well. And they'd asked me, because I had been been giving feedback to our corporate talent group that they just focused on corporate and they really weren't giving any practical tools for the businesses. So taking on that role, I went to the States for a year to work with corporate as well, to review everything they had and kind of make pragmatic tools and processes for the businesses and then introduce them. And I used my role and pilot a lot of things for Cargill Inc. through that. So I did that role for about 4 years and then left Cargill. So I left there and then I was doing an executive master's with INSEAD in France on consulting and coaching for change. So I thought I had a lot of the experience, maybe get the theory behind it now. And as I did that, I did some consulting work too. And when I finished that, then I got a job with a company called LafargeHolcim, which is a building materials company, a Swiss-German company in Switzerland. What attracted to me, it was not that they made cement, because it's not a very sexy product. What attracted to me was they needed to overhaul and transform the whole corporate human resources function, and particularly the talent area, and improve the credibility of HR overall and talent. Because what happened, and again, this would be something maybe for some people to maybe of interest, is the corporate group, most of them had only been in corporate or had done learning or development or talent role, but they'd never been in a business. So they made these beautiful, wonderful things like a 120-page document on competencies and how you can develop them, which no one ever read. Because, I mean, by the time you kind of figure out and get to it in 120 pages, you know, it's not practical for the business. You need to have something that's more simple and light for the businesses. And I was only working with them 4 months, just booked a house because I was going to move to Switzerland. And they announced the merger of equals. They were merging with a French company, Lafarge. And the deal was the two biggest shareholders of both organizations were wanting cash out of the business. Due diligence had not been done before close, and that came up later on. But anyway, I stayed there for nearly 3 years and went back to doing consulting work, and that's where I am today.
Wow, that's a fascinating story. It sounds like your time in Cargill, it was about 7 different jobs in the sense of because of the breadth of what you've done, the breadth of the challenges.
Yes. If you told me, so when I went to the UK, like a lot of Irish people, I thought, oh, I'll be here for, maybe 3-5 years, get some good experience and go back home. If you told me then that I would end up staying with the company nearly 25 years, I would laugh at you. But because of the size of Cargill and the diversity, there was always new opportunities. And actually, when you say 7, 5 of those roles were new roles. They didn't exist. So I had to kind of make them up as I went along. And that was the great thing with Cargill. Those opportunities were there and they were given to you. If you proved yourself, they were given to you. So that's what kind of kept me with them for so long.
How do you identify, or what's your experience of talent? There's different levels of talent. There's different needs and different thresholds. So you mentioned, obviously, that was your global talent and leadership development within Cargill. Mm-hmm. What was to break back from the language, what were you looking for in the people who internally and maybe externally?
Yeah. So first of all, when you're saying talent, I mean, the term is, it can be everybody, but what we were doing in both Cargill and in LafargeHolcim is you're segmenting the group. So that the first key thing from a corporation is, who are the key people that could replace, the C-suite and other significant roles. So in Cargill, it was the top 200 and LafargeHolcim was the 150. So that was an area in itself, as in what's the pipeline of people that could do these roles in the future. And then there's a term like that are ready now, ready soon, which say they have one more experience, or ready later, needed 2 experiences. That was the terminology we used. Then you have the graduates, the young people that you want to identify, and who are the up and coming people in that pipeline that you want to also develop and, put them on projects or move them around the world to develop them. Then you had a group of the experts, because you have what we call the deep expertise. So you have the people that will continue to work in finance, will be the experts in tax and take on a bigger tax role and take on a global tax role or legal, etc. So you have those specialists that you need to also develop and have a pipeline for. Then you have the diverse, where, Cargill, like a lot of companies, we had at the stage when I started in food, we had 17% women in what we called a certain level of leadership positions. And then when it came to nearly the C-suite, it was less. So again, how do we kind of develop more, identify more, and help pull them through the organization? And then it could be diversity in different countries for different reasons. So for example, like in the US, they would have for the African American, because that was a group, as we know, that would be lower in leadership positions. But that wouldn't be something that you would focus on in Russia. In Russia, and maybe some of the ethnic minority groups there that they were, putting some attention on. And so that's why we segmented the groups and talent and how we looked at them. And then everybody else, they were still we were putting in the tools in place that they were for everybody else too. The natural ones from career development, etc. And we would also, over time, some of those people that would not be any of these pools may come into those pools over time. So it's a continuous moving, changing pools. So you could be, and that was the other thing too, which you may have heard from other people. Do you tell them or do you not tell them that they could be the future, potential leader or in the high potential pool? And the answer still is, yeah, I say, well, you can tell them, but you're the high potential for now, this moment. That could change depending on you, whether you're in it in 12 months or not. So, making sure that some of them weren't kind of getting, kind of arrogant or thinking, hey, I'm a high potential, or I'm going on this particular program, so, I'm special. So, and to me, if people were acting like that, as I would say to the leaders, they don't have the maturity, they're off. Because if they're going to start behaving like that and we're concerned about it, then they shouldn't be,
That's an ego thing, really, isn't it? That may not present until certain circumstances present and then it comes out. It might be hiding in there and suddenly that self-importance, sense of self-importance.
Yes, but it's also in the message you're giving. You need to be very clear in everything that you're doing with, your employees, your manager and employees. You're being very clear and very realistic. James, we think at this moment in time that you have the potential to do X in, say, 3 to 5 years' time. Here's what you would need to do. This is what you need to sustain, etc. That is for now. However, if you don't continue performing or demonstrating these things or improving on these things, you will not continue to be in that. And that has to be the realistic conversation that you're having with the people continuously, so that there's no surprise to them that when circumstances change, that suddenly they're not, that it's become as a shock, which unfortunately I've had to deal with cases where it's a shock to them because the manager hasn't had that frank, constructive conversation earlier on.
And when you're recruiting, say you're a graduate, so there will be graduates listening to this podcast and other people moving through the career, of course. What do you look? Okay, someone has on paper, they have the ingredients from work experience, they have the qualifications. What are you looking for in the human?
The human. And you're looking for, and again, some of those things, if you're talking about the graduate and their experiences, will kind of give some insight to them and what they have done, if they've kind of done interesting, challenging things, different. But generally what you're looking for a person that is open-minded, that is willing to learn, is curious, that is willing to take on challenges. So that's kind of the things that you're looking for, that they're articulate. Well, I have to be careful there on that when I say it, because some people, when you're talking to, English wouldn't be their first language. And what I've often said to people, particularly depending where they're coming in, don't judge people on their language skills, because if usually they have 2 or 3 languages, where most of us, Irish people are monolingual. But that they can, and that they have a passion that you can see, and they're curious. Even today, when people are saying, "Oh, the organization has to do as much work to hire the person," particularly the younger or hot skills people, you still need to have done your homework. You still need to be curious enough to find out about the company and the job, and come asking a lot of questions at the interview. If you're not asking me a lot of questions in the interview, I'm really trying to understand the job and the company. That's where I go, no, you're already kind of off. Because if you're not going to be asking and curious, a job that's going to take minimum 40 hours, if not more, of your life, if you're in Goldman Sachs, as we talk, then how are you going to approach other things? You need to have that curiosity and question things all the time.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm thinking people in COVID now, maybe graduates who have, in effect, their employment opportunities have been put on hold, or people who wanted to, in the natural flow, want to move maybe the second to third to fourth position. What advice would you give them? How do they? Because maybe some people might be challenged, the resilience, the energy may be low. You're being interviewed by Zoom or by Microsoft Teams. Have any thoughts or strategies or many strategies that they might take on board, and how they prepare to kind of give their pitch?
I think just what I've said there is do your homework. Really think about the questions you want to ask, as much as preparing yourself for what type of questions are going to be asked. But I think that, to me, is the important thing, is really know and question. Now, saying that, some of the interviewers that you may, even at the executive level, even in recent years, have been interviewed where the interviewer spends 80% of the time talking and the candidate has 20%. You have to try and, get as much as you can on the company, understand it, and show an interest in the job, and question even the person that's interviewing, if particularly that's the person you're going to be working for or within that team, about their job and what it's like a day in the business, etc. Because when you can link it back to me, the interviewer, it's nice that there is the psychological thing of kind of, what about me? So that I kind of found as well is useful for people to be curious about the person that's interviewing you.
Yeah. And what about culture? The culture of working from home, culture of working part-time in the office. There's a whole lot of debate and discussion during COVID. What are your thoughts around this? I know you shared before we came on air about the unwritten rules, which and you might expand, share that as well. I thought that was a lovely of organizations, which are probably the real drivers of organizations.
Well, there's 2 things. So I would say first, from the COVID and the way we're working at the moment, and now there's talking about the hybrid, or some people can kind of work totally remotely. They're all possible, but they have to be thought through properly, and not just for the individual, for the team, for the organization. So what I was saying before we got on the call was, everyone's talking about, we're going to be going to a hybrid model. But not everybody maybe in the organization go to a hybrid model. There's still people that need to be on site, and how are they going to be treated versus the people that will have the flexibility of coming in and out. But also, if you're working within the team, are you all going to be in the team at the same days in the office, or is it just 1 or 2 are in the team and the rest are at home working, and then working with customers? And the interesting thing, I was coaching someone, a coaching client who's very senior in an organization, is traveled in normal times, traveled 60 to 70% of his time because of his global role, going out there to the locations, etc. And he's been home for a year, and he says, I'm getting to know my kids. I actually realized I didn't know my kids that well. And I don't want to go back to that. And I'm not thinking of not going back to that. And he hadn't had that conversation yet with his manager. So I said, you need to talk to your CEO. And I'm sure he's not the only one that's thinking that. So even the roles where you have to get out and be out and seen across the world or the region or the country. There's a lot to think through. So that needs to be. And the second thing, you're talking about culture. So first of all, yeah, I did my first my master's, I did organization culture, and then kind of continued through since then and look at the world in that lens. I follow a model by a guy called Edgar Schein. Very simple. There's 3 levels of culture. One is what he calls the artifacts. What is it when you see when you go into an organization? Is it open plan? Are they dressed formally or casually? Do they have a canteen? What are the hours of work, etc.? Those are things you can see. Then there's what he calls the espoused, the rules, or sorry, the values that may be written down, or if they're not written down, they're known. So most organizations have their values written down and their behaviors. But the interesting part is the unwritten rules. How do things really work around here? So anyone starting, like a graduate or whatever, going in and quickly kind of find out how things really operate. Who's the real decision makers here? How are decisions made? A meeting. Do they start on time? Do they have an agenda? Do they kind of follow up on things? Do they complete things in the meeting? Are they effective or not? And how much is that cascading the organization? But the other key things is what do leaders pay attention to? What do they ignore? What would you never get away with? What do some people maybe never get away with? Performance management, how does it work? So it's getting to really to understand how things really work around there, because there's often a disconnect. And the organization may not consciously know about it, but there can be a disconnect, and just kind of understanding that and whether you want to change it or not. So if I'm coming in and I'm working with teams, whether it's just in the team or whether I'm helping them in a change piece of transformation, it's to get to that, to understand how do you really operate here, and understand what of how you operate is the way you want to continue to operate going forward or not. And one that you commonly hear back is the whole performance management, and how some people feel that it's done effectively for them or not versus others. And, getting that feedback, etc., or seeing how some people are promoted or get other kind of things that are signals that they're doing well, but they're not. And why isn't it? Or why is that person able to get away with things and do little work and I'm not? These are kind of the things that can have then your turnover and people leaving and getting frustrated.
That's right. And did you have mentors as you moved through that? Well, maybe they weren't formal mentors, but as you moved through your career, and would you advise a younger person to search out and find good people who may be able to support them around even just confidence, or someone to talk to, or someone offline to say, I'm struggling, or I have a problem with this, just kind of work it out?
I ended up with 2 female mentors working. It wasn't planned. It just happened that way as the relationships developed. Quite different women in different ways. One was very strategic, very future looking. And we used to tease her sometimes like she needed to come back to planet Earth, but she just great ideas. She had a great way of looking at things. And she came actually from an organization effectiveness background. So I learned a lot from her. And still to this day, I would speak to her and things. The other one was a very pragmatic, no nonsense, down to earth woman, and willing to put the elephant on the table and cut through things to get things done, or to get that issue, put it on the table because everyone's just dancing around it. And so both of them, I learned a lot. And I would say for people of any age, younger, find people, doesn't have to be a mentor necessarily, but you see what they do well and observe them and try and learn that from them, and maybe ask them. There's people who are, hey, great presenters. I've seen great presenters over time, and I would observe them and maybe even ask them some questions afterwards. Great negotiators, etc. People that stay very calm, in situations. Those are very motivational people. Different things that you could see, learn from people, because it's not all in one. It's not all in one person. So, so whether you have a formal mentor, which a lot of graduate programs now have, if it's a graduate program, whether you have a formal mentor internally, maybe find one, externally as well. Maybe it's even an older brother or sister or cousin or somebody that a friend that you can kind of bounce things off.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I'm just looking back at my own career. I was very lucky through sport, just to chance some people who I didn't know at the time. I probably wasn't aware how actually successful they were. But they were very open, honest people. They were very clear communicators. They were generous with their time, as long as you didn't waste it. Mm-hmm. And they were open to be asked. And that's my sense now. Most people, or a lot of people, have had that experience, and they're happy to pay it back.
Yeah.
So maybe people go on there.
Yeah. One thing I would say for people when they're starting a new project or going somewhere, ask other people around, their ideas and suggestions. Don't go think, oh, great, I got this promotion, or I got this product, great, going to go in there and I know what I'm doing. Be open to ask other people, what you're doing. Sorry, for suggestions on them and anything and everything.
Over the 25 years, how has it changed for being a woman in business for you?
Well, sometimes I was the only woman and Irish in the room. So yes, no, it has changed quite a lot now. It depends, because when I started with Wholesome, it was still all men around the table. And of course, that was one of the remits too, was to try and increase it and promote it. But again, it's funny. You go to certain countries in the world, and this is not an issue. In Eastern Europe, generally, there may be more even women on senior leader positions than men. And that comes from the culture before of communism, so that everyone was equal. And even some of them would say, well, their grandmother had to work because all the men were at war or killed. You go to Colombia in Latin America, there's more women than men because culturally they're more responsible than women, than men. Turkey, I was surprised with, our trading business was mostly the senior people were women. And again, it's because of the national service that the men have to do. When they were setting up the business and the startup, they were in doing service, and the women were able to kind of get a step up, and in a Muslim country. So again, it breaks down a lot of different stereotypes. Then India was different because that was a struggle, because once they get married in their arranged marriages, they go to maybe physically a different part of the country. So we were having turnover issues. We weren't able to keep them because they were physically moving. Now, with remote now and COVID, and that hopefully in some of these countries now that will also change too. So it again varied across the world.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I think you referenced. You heard we had some wonderful young professional people, women on a call last week from who are working around the world, and their sense of opportunity and their sense of going forward, and no barriers, no blocks, no negativity. Now, it still hasn't fully changed, but it's great to see. Very refreshing to see that energy.
The thing that we're still stumbling with, and actually COVID is unfortunately bringing it back a bit, is mobility. And again, with COVID and how much you can do remotely, for certain roles in both Cargill and Wholesome, if you wanted to be a CEO or a general manager of a multi-country, you had to have an experience outside of your own country. Women were less mobile, particularly if there's family or kids, than the men, the high potential men. So this was interesting too, that the mobility was an issue. And then women deciding as well, hey, I want to see my kids. I don't want to, so I'm going to maybe not take that promotion, or, do a different role for a couple of years. That we're still having that there's a pipeline, and then suddenly near the top, it's falling off again. And that is still the piece that we have to break through. And what we're seeing now in COVID, you may have seen different articles on it, that it's the women that are being impacted most, as in kind of, I'm stepping down because, the situation and family. Even at C-suite level, women are coming off because of the family commitments, or whether it's a burden or they feel themselves, hey, actually, when I look at things, is this important? But that's happening at the moment. So we still have to get over that bump just below C-suite, the next level, that's the pipeline in there. But also we need to change what we are looking for in a role. So before they say, hey, they need to have 10 years commercial experience. Well, what exactly commercial experience they need to have? Because you could be doing the same thing for 10 years, or you have had pretty diverse, intense experiences in 2 or 3 years that actually are worth that 10. And so it's even how we look at what we're looking for in the job is changing and needs to change more.
It's good to hear. So we're nearly there on one level, but it'll take a generation maybe to push out of men, in effect, where that and changes of mindset.
Yeah. Well, we don't need to push out the men, because I actually had this Dutch guy one day pass in my office when we just announced, by chance, 2 women had got 2 significant senior roles that had been announced that week. And he came in saying, unless you're a woman, you're not going to get any jobs around here. There's still plenty for the men, because I actually had the stats we were doing at that time for globally on promotions and changes to that. So there's still room for the men. I mean, as one guy said it to me years ago when he got involved as one of our sponsors he said, from a resource issue, 50% of the planet is female. We should be leveraging that resource, around the world.
My late mother, who got married at 21, she said she'd like to see a few men have babies and then see how strong they are. So that was a lovely, really from someone who was discriminated playing golf, and she wasn't allowed to play on a particular day because she was, or go to the bar because she was a woman, or had to leave her job because she got married. So there are things that really are.
And you were talking about the Vico, you were swimming. I said, and remember, with the 40-foot was men only.
That's right. I think that's very much changed now, thankfully.
Yes, it has.
For that. My last 2 questions, Lorraine, and the first one is about workplace stress. And really, from your experience looking at high performance people when they burn out, and your role, I mean, HR, inverted commas, tends to be the person that's, when the fire, maybe the fire started and it's too late and the fire brigade's called. Over the last number of years with emails, just that excess stress on people, have you any thoughts and comments on how that can be ameliorated?
Well, first of all, it's not HR's role. And that's the thing that people, it's a people issue, it's HR. No, it's the manager. It's the managers to make sure and know and keeping a pulse on their their team, who's doing well and who's not, and what reasons. When I've got involved and you had these people that had been high performance, high potentials, and suddenly something's happened, 9 times out of 10 is something outside of work. And if there's no relief of the pressure between the intensity of work and the intensity of what's going on outside of work, then something is giving there. So the thing is, you need to be finding out from people, how are you? And not just saying it once and kind of, fine. It's asking them, how are you really? Asking them a second time. I saw that recently and I thought that was a good to find out from people. And then the other thing, which we as Irish seem to have a problem sometimes is saying no, but you don't have to necessarily say no. It's saying, okay, you want to give me this additional project or whatever. Okay, but let's kind of sit down and prioritize. So I've got these other things too. So do the priorities change here? Because really, and again, you have to have your facts to be able to say, I can't deliver these 5 projects by this date, and here's the reasons why. So if something has to go from a priority. So there's a negotiation with the manager too, or whoever on that. Now, of course, if you're more junior in the organization, how junior you are, you may not have any say in it, and they just will dump it on you. But there you need, as an individual then as well, to speak up, to say, hey, either the work is too much for what reason, and have the facts, or to disclose what's going on at home. Because 9 times out of 10, managers realize if there's something on, they're pretty accommodating on it, and will ease up or even give some help or whatever. And again, depends on the organization. So you need to both have to find ways to talk to each other.
Okay, so it's but I've pushed back a little bit on the HR, and I know exactly it's not HRs. I get that, but in smaller organizations, in a sense, that HR person or leadership and development person tends to be for the manager who may not be equipped to handle what's in front of them. Say, how do I handle this? What do I do with this? It was more that sense. Obviously, in a large organization, that's more difficult to make happen. Are there now people who have those skill sets are in organizations that what was that? Was it the movie or the show Billions, where they have this wonderful psychiatrist or psychologist who's available for the traders to kind of, if they're under stress, so in effect ameliorates where they are in that space and time, and then when they go back to their work, that they're not as out of sync with themselves, so they perform.
So I will come back again, even in the smaller organizations. And again, this is a mindset for changing. You talk about culture. That HR person should be helping to equip, or the L&D, the managers to have the conversations, rather than, go to HR. That's the thing. The HR should, and that's what I would have done all my career, is I will sit with the relevant manager. Hey, I'm going to have a talk with Fred or Mary. Right. I will coach them and guide them on that conversation, but they have to have the conversation. So that's where I come in, is I help them in preparing for that conversation. And then L&D or others, we may give them training, so that how do you give feedback? How do you have the difficult conversations? How do you deal with conflict, etc.? Because that's to me, the fundamental thing is where managers are falling down when they don't have those conversations, or put it off, and it gets to be a big issue, is they've been afraid to deal with the potential conflict. So what I do with people is I say, okay, so imagine they get angry. Imagine they cry. Imagine that they're stunned or silent, and I walk them through those scenarios and prepare them for them, so that it makes it easier to have the conversation. Now they're prepared. If any of those things happen, now I know what to do, rather than being stunned, or I've been in the room and I have to stop and get out of the room. Let's adjourn for a moment before they put their foot in it. Because again, in smaller organizations, and everyone, if you're thinking of from a disciplinary or the the other process, come to my mind in a minute.
Grievance
procedure. Yeah. HR you want to keep out as long as possible, because once they get involved, that's the formality of it, etc. Keep them out as long as possible. So I keep out as long as possible out of it, so that when I need to come in, if I need to come in, then I do. But I have the conversations with the relevant manager going along. So I'm not saying that HR doesn't have the role. It's just that they need to make sure the managers are taking on the role and they are having those conversations.
That's great, and it's great to hear that, because I think your experience and how you talk about it, and that just your professionalism as it comes across to me. But I feel a big heart beneath it, and the sense of finding brilliant talent for organizations where they can do what they got to do to realize what they need, creating those pipelines, and changing people's lives. And maybe people don't believe HR do, but I do, in that sense. And someone sees something in somebody they don't see in themselves, and just pops them into the environment. Lorraine, listen, I want to thank you so much for your time today. You've been very generous with it, and thanks for sharing some of parts of your career and your experiences. I'm sure people would get great knowledge from it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Career Scoop, brought to you by Elevate Career Advice. and Elevate Executive Selection, Dublin and Bermuda. I'm James Fitzsimons, and I hope you've enjoyed listening. Hope you tune in next week for more episodes. Bye.